What's a conspiracy theory that you heard that kind of made you think, what if they were right? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. That the province of New Brunswick is denying the existence of eastern cougars so they won't have to designate a huge bunch of land as protected wildlife habitat. NBA refs are still rigging games. It's not as straightforward as making sure one team wins, since a lot of high-roller gamblers are betting on things like single quarters, individual players, or over-unders. One example that really stands out is last year. There was a game between the Mavericks and, I think, the Kings, where it was the final seconds and the score wasn't close, so the players were just letting the clock run out, and the ref called a technical on Luka Doncic for seemingly no reason. Turns out, the one free throw for the technical was the difference between the over and the under hitting. When Tim Donaghy was caught fixing games, he said he wasn't the only one and was going to wear a wire for the FBI, but someone tipped off David Stern and it never happened. Shocker. I learned about the light bulb conspiracy, in which light bulb companies were colluding to deliberately design light bulbs not to last over a certain amount of hours, and found out that one was true. Ever since, I'm curious about how many similar conspiracies are true about modern products. Printer ink being overpriced and printers being designed not to allow alternatives. Cell phones being designed not to last past a certain number of years and to resist or prevent repairs. Pharmaceuticals being rigged in this way to cost more money than they need to, etc. Basically, I wonder how many practices that are clearly bad for the consumer are in wide use with regulators doing nothing about it. The government helps spread some of the more ridiculous conspiracy theories, so when a real conspiracy comes up, no one really cares, because it's not anywhere near as wild as all the other dumb shit. David Miscavige, the chairman of the Church of Scientology, definitely murdered his wife and is getting off scot-free for it. Him and his wife got into a pretty heated argument in 2007, and she hasn't been seen since. Lawyers hired by David claim she is still alive and devotes 100% of her time to work at the Church of Scientology, which is why she hasn't been seen since August 2007. In 2013, a former member of the church had filed a missing persons report that was closed after a few officers had spoken and seen Mrs. Miscavige, even though there's no evidence whatsoever of this meeting. All missing person reports now are turned down, since the investigation is forever closed. Honestly, Marilyn Monroe's death. I know she was troubled and had her fair share of drug use, but I think she got to a point where she was a liability with her involvement with JFK. There's one crank pushing the conspiracy that there was no single Zodiac killer. Rather, the letters were a distraction created by dirty law enforcement officers to cover up killings connected to their drug trade. His theory doesn't quite hold together, but it's based on the idea that the murders were so different weapons, different kinds of victims, and that the letters and phone calls contained things found in initial police reports but might have been falsely reported. The idea being that only someone with access to police records could write them. I don't remember all the details, but it's at least an entertaining theory, much better than the books we get every year. My father was the Zodiac killer because he wore glasses in the 60s. A lot of rich and powerful people didn't want Epstein alive. With the number of millionaire-billionaires that are psychopaths or similar, there must be a few super-rich serial killers out there. By extension, there must be people making money supplying victims in the same way Epstein was supplying girls to the wealthy who wanted to scratch an itch. With the money, power, and influence would come governments and intelligence agencies willing to overlook or cover up terrible actions for leverage. I'll take the low-hanging fruit. The Epstein suicide was outrageous. I've never seen an issue in recent memory where the far left and far right were in complete agreement and equally outraged over the same issue. Calling it a conspiracy theory doesn't do it justice. It's a hypothesis, and a highly likely one, that he was killed or was allowed to kill himself. The cameras malfunctioned and the guards fell asleep. For fuck's sake, that is some lazy plot writing. Amen. This one isn't as serious as most of the ones on here, but I enjoy it and have gotten into many combos about it. In the 2017 NBA playoffs, a player named Markieff Morris, who at the time played for the Washington Wizards, hurt his ankle in Game 1. this was only 11 minutes into the game and he didn't return. The injury looked like he would be out for a couple weeks, and no one expected him to play Game 2. But he showed up Game 2 and played as if he was never injured. In fact, had his best game statistically of the playoffs to that point. Here's where it gets interesting. Markieff Morris has an identical twin brother named Marcus, who also plays in the NBA. His brother was playing for the Pistons, who were eliminated from the playoffs already. The theory is that Marcus played for his brother. Both brothers have the exact same tattoos and don't have any super apparent different traits. So this is my personal theory. Since the pandemic, certain jobs have proven they can be remote without losing any productivity. Sure, your unmotivated or weaker employees don't do as well. However, if you're a good employee, you still produce or overproduce. Now, with all of these Fortune 500 companies wanting the office environment back, I 100% believe it's just because these rich investors have so much money tied to commercial properties, it would be a huge loss if their leases ended. Definitely financially driven, not work output loss. Just pawns in a rich man's world. That's us. The FBI had many reasons to assassinate MLK. The FBI saw him as a threat to capitalism for supporting many socialist ideas like universal basic income, etc. The assassin even admitted he was hired by someone who may have been part of the government. You should think about every conspiracy other than the ones that are deliberately meant to discredit, like Flat Earth and lizard people. If it makes sense from a money or power perspective, you should give it a real thought and not instantly dismiss it. That is all. That we will evolve due to environmental pressures, indoor living, maybe genetic engineering, into smaller, pale, hairless, genderless creatures with larger heads and larger eyes. We will continue to advance technology, but our immune systems will weaken. We will develop time travel and go back to the 1990s to harvest fecal samples from rural citizens to help improve our immune systems. TL, DR, those weren't aliens, they were time travelers. The US education system is designed to create worker bees, not critical thinkers. They don't want the average kid to succeed in life. There is only so much money, and therefore only so many people can be rich and look down on the rest of the citizens. If anyone can be rich, what's the point of being rich? Viking probes found life on Mars. Scientists in charge chickened out of huge discovery and came up with ways to partially explain the results. As time went on, those explanations were debunked, and they came up with more and more elaborate explanations. I've heard this one from one of my old biochem professors who, admittedly, was a bit out there, probably did acid regularly, and really very few students took him seriously. But then it turned out that a lot of the scientists in academia actually take this seriously. When Loose Change came out, I watched it and it got me thinking. Then I watched a debunking video, and that was that. What I really learned from it is that it's easy to frame anything in a way that gets people doubting reality. It's kind of like when I was introduced to religion. People just told me the gospel was true and I believed them. I was a kid, because it made sense to me the way they explained it. But really, it showed me how easy it is to frame anything as the truth and present it in a way that answers questions you didn't even know you have until they started telling you about it. Not sure if I'm making any sense at all. So I am not at all a QAnon believer in any way whatsoever, but someone else mentioned something about Scientology, and it made me think about a lot of things I've read about Scientology and people who survived the organization and got out. So plenty of people, including former members like Leah Remini, have written or talked about how many Scientology members are essentially slaves for celebrities. Tom Cruise was reported to have Sea Org members do renovations at his house, for which they are not compensated. The organization is also notoriously controlling and abusive, and Remini's documentary had some interviewees talk about some camps for kids where some sexual abuse had gone on that was covered up by the organization. One of the things QAnon believed was that there was a secret cabal of pedophiles in Hollywood that abused children, and based on the things I've read about Scientology, I would not be surprised at all if it turned out that the organization basically fit the bill for that. If they have a celebrity member who donates millions of dollars and provides free publicity to the organization and also happens to like suspiciously young girls or boys, I don't think it's impossible to believe that David Miscavige would cover it up or try to convince the parents of those kids that it somehow is a good thing. The whole organization is run by fear and control. Whether or not QAnon happens to be right about that one particular thing, I don't know. But I'm pretty sure that there is a lot of abuse going on at the Church of Scientology that is being covered up, and would not at all be surprised if there were many famous faces participating in it. Danny Masterson, for example, has already been accused of rape by several different women. Jar Jar Binks is actually a Sith Lord and had a much more massive role to play originally, but the Episode 1 outrage made them pull that back. Misa think it's silly. That the reason Osama bin Laden was killed rather than captured and tried in the USA was to prevent him from saying publicly that the Saudi Arabian monarchy knew about, helped bring about the 9/11 attacks. This would have strained or destroyed one of our most important alliances in the Middle East and might have even caused another war. That the current quit your job because you aren't being paid enough movement is actually being supported by all sorts of huge corporations. I'll explain why. Clearly, the cost of living has risen at unprecedented rates over the last few decades. Clearly, with higher costs of living, workers need to be paid more to, well, live. At the same time, big box stores and chain restaurants have also taken over the retail market, sucking profits away from private businesses. These smaller private businesses most often simply don't bring in enough profit to pay their workers more. Seriously, the margins in restaurants are razor thin, and that's with the help of customers paying most of the staff wages via tips. Well, now we have workers quitting their small business jobs because those small businesses can't afford to pay workers as much as the workers require to live. I firmly believe that over the next 5 to 10 years, we are going to see a massive amount of private businesses die off because mega corporations will temporarily raise wages to attract all available labor and lower them back down once enough competition has died off. Not one that I've heard, but I drove past a billboard one day for that stuff that's supposed to be able to stop a fentanyl overdose and immediately felt with absolute certainty that drug companies are spreading fentanyl into the community so they can sell the antidote. Yeah, makes sense. Kenneth Lay, former Enron CEO, was either killed or faked his own death to hide the secrets that he knows. JFK was killed because he wanted to break up the centralized banks. The kidnapping of the Christian missionaries in Haiti will be used as an excuse for the U.S. to occupy Haiti, because Haiti is about to reveal the U.S.'s involvement in the murder of its president. The accidental missile alert in Hawaii wasn't an accident. The theory goes that a radical branch of the Chinese military launched a nuke from a sub in the middle of the Pacific. Hawaiian anti-missile defense shot it down, and the Chinese military then destroyed their own sub. Kinda sus on their part. According to insiders, there is no button that could be accidentally hit. There are 5 fail-safe procedures in the Hawaiian Emergency Alert Management System, the last being a 2-key system, such as are present in U.S. missile silos and on U.S. nuclear missile submarines. 2 keys, 8 feet apart, requiring 2 different individuals to simultaneously and positively trigger the alert. Emperor Constantine had dark motivations behind his elevation of Christianity. It was an attempt to neutralize that religion by co-opting it. Once that was out of the way, the church, meaning the specific variant of Christianity he elevated, could wipe out the competing variants with the aid of Roman state power. Epstein didn't kill himself. The claims of satanic ritual abuse are not as false as claimed. I'm reasonably sure in most cases it has nothing to do with any kind of Satanism, but rather, I believe many pedophiles are themselves aware of the past satanic panic and how so many of those claims are discredited. As a result, some pedophiles figure they could get away with their crimes by staging their assaults as satanic rituals, the existence of which get disbelieved and dismissed by the authorities if the kid rats them out. I heard once that all the richest families' leaders came together, bankers mostly. They'd come up with a plan to make the state's citizens dependent upon them by making the vast majority of us destitute. They'll get lobbyists to make it possible. They'll give risky home loans to people, then seize their houses. They'll make it to where people are dependent upon food stamps, which they provide by getting deals with the government. Cost of living is based on inflation. And who controls inflation? they'll skyrocket with the inflation so that it'll financially bleed out anyone not super rich. That way, more and more people will be driven to government assistance, which again they'll provide. They'll give student loans that will garnish wages that can never be rid of unless paid. I don't believe it fully, but wow, is it lining up to look like it's feasible?